Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The scope quivered with every heartbeat. 2,730 meters away, a single candle flickered against the wind. Laughter broke behind her. Someone bet $2,000 she wouldn't even hit the paper. Eleanor Trace said nothing. She breathed in once and fired. 7 seconds later, silence. The flame was gone. The candle stood untouched, the wax unbroken. No one spoke. Then her sleeve slipped back. A scar shimmered beneath the skin, geometric, branded deep. The colonel's face went pale. That mark wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Neither was she. What happened next in Tunisia changed everything. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? And if you believe honor and courage still matter, help keep their legacy alive. The rifle scope trembled in her hands. 2,730 meters away, a single candle flame shimmered against the desert wind. Someone behind her laughed. "Too grand," says she can't even see it. Eleanor Trace didn't answer. She lay flat on the mat, one knee pressed into the sand, the Arizona sun cutting across her back. The wind at Yuma Proving Ground hissed through the wire fence like a taunt. Sable Team stood in a loose half-circle behind her, arms crossed, eyes half-mocking. To them, she was just some outsider with a trembling hand and a strange piece of gear, the kind of experiment command sent when it wanted a quiet failure. Trace unlatched the wooden case beside her. Inside rested a matte black rifle and a modular stabilizer with exposed cables and cooling vents, the Stabilis Mach 3. She connected the cables in silence, ignoring the smirks forming behind her. "Looks like she's building a toaster," Maddox said, earning a few laughs. The colonel didn't join them. Nathan Rourke simply watched, arms folded, expression unreadable. Trace adjusted the bipod, laying the rifle down with the same precision surgeons used for scalpels. Her fingers twitched as she aligned the scope. It wasn't nerves, it was damage. The kind that never left. 9-mile crosswind from the southwest. Left 1.02 mils, down 2.3. Her lips moved soundlessly as she read the numbers. The red streamer near the firing post twisted erratically. She waited, patient, eyes calm while her hands shook. She'd spent years learning to move between the tremors, not against them, any time today. Maddox muttered. Trace exhaled, long and steady, until the sound of his voice disappeared behind her breath. Her cheek rested against the stock. The rifle hummed softly. The suppressor coughed once. No echo, no recoil thunder, just the hiss of air splitting apart. 7.9 seconds later, the flame vanished, not wavered, not dimmed, gone. The candle itself stood untouched, wax unbroken. No one spoke. The silence hit harder than the shot. Dust swirled at her elbows as if the desert itself didn't know what to do next. Trace stayed prone, watching the horizon through the fading mirage. She didn't smile, didn't turn around. Her left hand trembled on the bolt handle, a tremor she didn't bother to hide. The $1,000 bill slid from Maddox's hand, landing in the dirt between his boots. Rourke took 2 slow steps forward, eyes still fixed on her. "Who trained you?" he asked under his breath. Ward lowered her binoculars. "Sir," she said quietly, "you should see this." As Trace lifted her rifle to clear the chamber, her sleeve rolled back. A faint mark shimmered beneath the skin of her forearm, geometric, pale, deliberate. Not ink, not scar. Something older, burned into memory and flesh alike. Ward froze. "That can't be real," she whispered. Rourke's gaze sharpened. He'd seen that symbol once, buried in a redacted DARPA archive. It wasn't supposed to exist anymore. He knelt beside her. "Where did you serve?" Trace locked the bolt open and met his eyes. "Nowhere you'd find on a map." The tone wasn't defiance, it was survival. Behind them, the other soldiers shuffled uneasily. The desert wind returned, carrying the smell of gunpowder and heat. The candle still stood, smoke rising in a single thin line. Ward broke the silence first. "Sir, that's Project Lucid." The words hung like static. Maddox swallowed hard. Rourke's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're not supposed to be alive." Trace closed the rifle case, each movement deliberate, quiet, efficient. She lifted the handle with her trembling hand and steadied it. "Why come here?" Rourke asked. Trace glanced at the horizon where the candle had stood. "To see if the math still listens," she said. He exhaled slowly, unsure if he'd just witnessed skill or resurrection. The soldiers stepped back, parting instinctively as she walked past them. The hum of the Stabilis Mach-3 faded behind her, leaving only the wind. At the far ridge, the wick still smoked proof that something beyond explanation had just happened, for the first time that morning. Sable Team stopped betting. They just watched her go. The woman whose shaking hands had outshot death itself. The helicopter blades carved thin shadows across the dunes. Heat shimmered over the desert outside Mansour, Tunisia, as the sun fell behind the ridges. Inside the cabin, Sable Team sat silent, faces hidden behind respirator masks. At the center, Eleanor Trace adjusted the screen on her wrist pad. Data streamed upward: wind, pressure, barometric drift. The same quiet precision she'd carried since Yuma, only now the stakes were real. Mission window 19 minutes. Colonel Nathan Rourke said over the headset, "Find Al-Nadir. Secure the site. Bring him back breathing." No one acknowledged. They all knew the odds. Trace's voice broke through the static. "Thermal drone shows minimal movement near the compound. No armed patrols." Cole Maddox grinned behind his mask. "So it's a field trip?" She ignored the joke. Her fingers trembled as she keyed the coordinates into the drone console. Even through the gloves, she could feel the faint vibration, the tremor she never escaped. The Osprey dropped low, sand whipping against the hull. At 0100, they touched down outside the perimeter fence. No gunfire, no alarms, just the heavy breath of desert air. Inside the compound, everything was wrong. No lights, no guards. Every surface polished, reflective, untouched by time. The smell hit first chemical, sterile, and sharp. "Looks abandoned," Ward said quietly. "Abandoned labs don't hum." Trace replied. She pointed toward the corridor ahead, where a faint vibration came from beneath the floor. Maddox led the stack. Their boots echoed against metal grating as they reached the central lab door. A yellow hazard sign hung half-peeled above the keypad. Trace watched their telemetry from the command uplink. Her heart synced with the blips of their vital signs. Something about the silence made her stomach tighten. "Door's locked," Pike said. "Override it," Rourke ordered. The hiss of hydraulics followed a sound that should have been routine. When the door opened, a burst of sterile light spilled into the hallway. Glass tanks lined the walls, each filled with clear liquid, and at the center an isolation chamber holding a single vial, glowing faint blue. Maddox stepped closer, raising his rifle. "Guess this is his toy chest. Don't touch anything," Trace warned through comms. He didn't listen. The moment his hand brushed the frame, every alarm in the facility screamed alive. Red strobes flared as vents hissed overhead. Trace's monitors spiked gas release detected. Compound unknown. Her pulse raced. "Everyone mask up now," but it was already too late. Ward coughed, voice breaking. "It's in the air." Pike stumbled, his hands shaking violently. Maddox dropped his rifle, gripping the table to stay upright, vitals crashing. Trace shouted. The data feed bled red across her screen. She activated every purge protocol, rerouting filters to maximum. But the compound wasn't in any database. "This isn't Al-Nadir's formula," she muttered. "It's something else." Rourke's voice cut in. "Trace, get me visuals on the east chamber now." The drone camera pivoted toward an adjacent room. There he was, Dr. Karim Al-Nadir, sitting calmly behind a reinforced window. Hands folded. A black ring wrapped around his wrist, a pressure loop deadman switch. "If I relax," he said through the intercom. Voice steady. "They all die." His eyes flicked toward the ceiling camera. "You too." "Colonel." Trace clenched her jaw. "You're bluffing." Al-Nadir smiled faintly. "Ask her," he said, pointing toward the drone feed. "She knows what my work does." Rourke turned. Trace, her pulse froze. 3 years ago, That same symbol, the one burned into her arm, had marked the weapon he created. The same toxin that destroyed her nervous system. But Al-Nadir wasn't the architect. He was just the builder. Someone else had given the order. Trace's eyes darted across the console. Pressure gauge 60 psi, rising. She whispered, "Give me 10 seconds." Her fingers flew across the controls, deploying a micro-UAV through the vent shaft. The feed flickered, then stabilized. The drone maneuvered behind Al-Nadir, targeting the valve of his containment tube. "One shot." She breathed. The dart fired, shattering the glass conduit feeding the loop. Pressure dropped instantly. The ring fell slack around his wrist. Ward stormed the door, subduing him before he could react. The alarms cut off as suddenly as they'd started. Trace exhaled for the first time in minutes. "Containment secure," she said. Her voice trembled, but the line stayed steady. The team evacuated to the extraction zone. The Osprey rose into the night, carrying the prisoners and the poisoned. Inside. Ward pressed her shaking hand against Maddox's arm. He tried to steady it and failed. Pike's fingers twitched uncontrollably against his thigh. Every one of them had the same tremor. Back at Yuma. Trace watched their scans light up her screen. Neurological interference, identical to her own but 5 times faster. She felt her chest tighten. It's mutating. Rourke stood behind her, silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "The report says Al-Nadir was subcontracted." Trace turned slowly. "By who?" He looked away. "An American firm. Code designation Vector 19. The hum of the monitors filled the room. Trace's hands began to shake again, not from illness but rage. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. "They used him to finish what they started." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And they used us to test it." Outside, the desert wind howled against the hangar walls. Inside, the woman who had outshot death was staring at its blueprint, and for the first time, she wasn't aiming to survive, she was aiming to strike back. The lab lights burned through the night at Yuma. Eleanor Trace hadn't left the engineering bay in 3 days. Coffee had gone cold. Solder smoke lingered, and the air vibrated with the hum of machines that refused to rest. Her reflection ghosted in the glass of the test chamber. Eyes ringed with fatigue, hair tied back in a quick knot. She flexed her fingers once, watching them tremble. Every twitch was a reminder the toxin was winning. Rourke entered quietly, setting a file on her bench. "Pentagon's waiting on your report," he said. She didn't look up. "Then tell them to wait longer." He sighed. "They're scared. If Vector 19 built that compound, this goes beyond us." Trace adjusted a calibration dial. Then maybe they should stop pretending it doesn't exist. The Stabilis mech 3 lay open before her. Half-dissected its gyros, humming faintly. Every screw, every microchip carried her handwriting, her history. The first version had kept her alive. The next had to save the others. She pulled a thin cable through the frame and whispered, "No more shaking." A chime cut through the room. Cole Maddox appeared in the doorway, arm wrapped in gauze, hands still trembling. "They said you wanted live data." She nodded once. He crossed the floor, every step uneven but determined. His jaw clenched as he lowered himself behind the firing mat. "Breathe steady," she said, voice soft but firm. Maddox exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked downrange, hit the dirt 3 feet wide. He cursed, slamming the bolt. Trace stepped beside him, adjusting the stabilizer's recoil sync. "It's not about strength," she murmured. "It's about rhythm." She reached over, guiding his elbow. "Let the tremor lead, then catch it halfway." He blinked. Tried again. The next shot split the bullseye dead center. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Maddox laughed under his breath, the sound half shock, half disbelief. Rourke watched from the control window, arms folded. Ward leaned beside him. "She's turning their weakness into calibration data." He nodded slowly. "She's rebuilding soldiers from fault lines." By dawn, 6 members of Sable Team had joined her. The range echoed with quiet commands, soft corrections, and the rhythmic cough of suppressed fire. Every bullet carried a story, each man trying to remember who he'd been before the tremor. When Trace finally took a break, her hands were still shaking. She leaned against the glass wall, watching them train. They were adapting faster than she'd dared hope. A shadow fell beside her. Pike stood there, holding a folded photo in one hand. He hesitated, then handed it to her. Two men smiled back from the picture, same jawline, same eyes. "Dean," he said quietly. "My brother. Force Recon." Trace nodded. "What happened?" Pike stared at the range. He came back from Kandahar. Hands started shaking. They said he was done. He swallowed hard. He took his life 11 months later. The silence that followed was heavy, but not cold. Trace placed the photo on the table, aligning it perfectly with the edge. "This won't bring him back," she said, "but it might stop the next one." That night, the storm rolled in from the west, lightning flickering over the desert. Inside, Trace worked under emergency lights as the power grid fluctuated. The hum of the stabilizer rose to a strange pitch, half mechanical, half heartbeat. She wiped the sweat from her forehead. The screen blinked. Miles protocol active. Motion integration for limb equilibrium system, her new code. Ward entered with a flask of coffee, eyes wide. "You're mapping their tremors into real-time correction." Trace smiled faintly. "Not correction. Synchronization." Her hands hovered over the console. "The system doesn't fight the tremor, it listens to it." Minutes later, the test began. Maddox stepped up again, wearing the new brace, no electronics. Just a motion-linked harness wired into the rifle's frame. Trace adjusted the oscillation to match his pulse. "Whenever you're ready," she said. He inhaled. Fired. 3 shots, 1 hole. The room fell silent except for the faint beep of sensors stabilizing. Ward exhaled slowly. "He's steady," Rourke whispered. "No, he's in tune." Trace sat down, exhaustion finally catching her. But her eyes stayed bright. "Record everything," she said. "We'll make the next model portable." Her voice trembled but didn't break. Outside, the storm hit full force. Rain streaking across the firing windows. The desert had waited months for water. Inside, the soldiers of Sable Team were learning to hold again. As dawn broke, the first sunlight caught the metal casing of the Stabilis prototype. Trace brushed her fingers across it, whispering, "We're not broken. We're recalibrated." And for the first time since Al-Nadir, her trembling hand didn't feel like weakness. It felt like proof she'd survived. The morning sky over Yuma burned white. The desert air shimmered, carrying the metallic hum of distant engines. Eleanor Trace stood alone on the firing line, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on a candle nearly 2 miles away. The Stabilis Mech 3 sat beside her, dark casing scuffed, its cooling fans barely turning. She'd pushed the prototype past every limit. This would be its final test. Her hand trembled as she checked the scope alignment, but the rhythm no longer frightened her. Rourke's voice cut across the intercom. "You sure you want to do this without the stabilizer online?" Trace adjusted her strap brace, fastening it tight around her forearm. "Not without it," she said quietly. "Beyond it, behind the glass." Sable Team watched in silence. No bets this time. No laughter. Just quiet breathing and the steady tick of wind sensors. Ward whispered. "Wind's shifting east again." Trace exhaled, reading the mirage lines rippling above the sand. 9-mile crosswind. Slight thermal distortion. She blinked once, steadying the sight until the candle resolved into a single, perfect flame. She squeezed the trigger. The suppressor hissed. 7 seconds later, the candle flickered once and went out. No movement, no applause, just the faint sound of wind carrying away the smoke. She opened the bolt, cleared the chamber, and set the rifle down. "Still listens," she murmured. When she turned, Colonel Rourke was walking toward her with a folder sealed in red. He didn't speak until he stood close enough that the heat shimmer between them blurred. "This came in overnight," he said, handing it to her. Trace flipped it open. Financial routing logs, contractor codes, encrypted memos, every page marked Vector 19. At the bottom, A signature block RT, Department Liaison, Fort Detrick. Her pulse tightened. This is American funding, she said. Rourke nodded grimly. They outsourced Al-Nadir's formula through shell firms, biocybernetic testing, classified off books. Trace's jaw locked. They used soldiers as data points. Ward stepped forward, eyes dark. How far does it go? Rourke shook his head. Paper trail ends there. Trace closed the file and said, Then that's where I'll start. The room fell silent. Every man there understood what that meant, a hunt, not an inquiry. For a long moment, Rourke said nothing. Then he simply replied, You won't go alone. That evening, the desert cooled under a violet sky. The memorial wall stood at the edge of the base, rows of polished granite catching the last light. Pike approached first, holding the photo of his brother Dean. He placed it gently at the foot of the wall. The glass caught his reflection beside the carved names. This place used to mean finished, he said softly. But not anymore. Trace joined him, hands clasped behind her back. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the scent of burnt gun oil. We built something out of the damage, she said. That's not an ending. Maddox set a small brass shell casing beside the photo. Ward lit a single candle from her pocket lighter, shielding the flame with her hand. The reflection of the fire danced across their faces, unsteady but alive. Rourke stepped up behind them, voice low. Pentagon's offering reinstatement, strategic development, Detrick Division. Trace turned. With Vector 19 under them, he hesitated. They want oversight, not exposure. She smiled faintly, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Then I'll go. Someone has to see what they're hiding. Rourke studied her face, searching for any trace of hesitation, and found none. Hours later, she stood on the tarmac beside a C-130 duffel slung over one shoulder. The night air hummed with engines idling in the distance. Ward handed her the candle from the memorial, still unlit. For luck, she said. Trace nodded, tucking it into her pocket. Keep training them. Don't stop. Ward smiled. Neither will you. The plane ramp lifted. Trace took one last look at the firing range, where faint scorch marks still marred the sand. She whispered to herself, We don't need steady hands, only the will to aim again. As the engines roared, Rourke watched from the control tower. A faint signal pinged across his console encrypted coordinates from an unregistered server. He leaned closer. The header read, Vector 19, phase continuation, live subjects 11. His throat tightened. God help us, he muttered. Downrange. Unnoticed. Someone had placed another candle in the sand. Its flame burned steady against the wind, fragile, defiant, and waiting. And somewhere beyond the horizon, inside the walls of Fort Detrick, a voice on the radio crackled through static Trace. You shouldn't have come here. The transmission cut to silence. The desert wind swallowed the sound, and the world held its breath, waiting for the next shot. If you enjoyed the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more stories like this. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear another story that's just as powerful and captivating, with courage, sacrifice, and a choice that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about duty and justice.